Hello, my name is Andrew Keane. Welcome to Keane on America, the daily interview show about the United States. Hello, everybody. It's Tuesday, the 17th of February, 2026. The headlines are full of stories about one kind of protest or another. New York Times a couple of days ago had a headline about a Columbia University protester who was held by ICE, who says that she was chained to a bed after a seizure. The guys at Fire, who have been on the show lots of times, are protecting New Yorkers' right to demonstrate near houses of worship. Barack Obama has argued that ICE demonstrators have a right to be on the streets of Minneapolis. And of course, outside the United States, the demonstrations continue in Iran, real demonstrations, or at least demonstrations with massive consequences, bloody consequences for the brave people standing up to the regime there. Meanwhile, there's a new book out about protest by my guest today, Bruce Robbins, who's a professor of the humanities at Columbia University, has a new book out. It's called Who's Allowed to Protest? Bruce is joining us from his home in Tribeca on Manhattan. Bruce, what kind of title is that? Isn't anyone allowed to protest? Are you suggesting that some people shouldn't be allowed to?
Very, very far from me to suggest such a thing. I mean, given what you just said, I'm struck by the double standard that our government seems to be wildly enthusiastic when the people of Iran protest, but not so enthusiastic when the people of Minneapolis do. So that's anyway, it's worth mentioning. No,
yeah, I think it goes without saying that, at least on Keen on America, we're very much in the protest rights camp. I don't think we would suggest that anyone shouldn't be able to protest.
Right. No, I have no doubt about that from what I know of you. The inspiration for this book, really, as a kind of rant, I have to say, was certain reactions in the mainstream press when the students at Columbia, where I teach, protested the violence, military violence in the spring of 2024 in Gaza. And people were saying in obvious places like the New York Post, but also slightly less obvious places like the New York Times, you really don't have to listen to these kids. They're brats at an elite school. They're just doing this to make themselves feel morally superior. Are they starving like the people of Gaza are starving? No, they're not starving. They're elites, and you really don't have to listen to them.
So it's like this character, Lika, Cordia, who was hospitalized. Is the argument that she was part of an elite? She went to Columbia University, so she had no right to protest?
Something like that. I mean, I suppose there are other versions of it, that there are people who are not Americans, if they're, here as a result of our hospitality, then free speech rights should not apply to them. Mahmoud Khalil, that you've probably covered in one way or another, who was a student who was involved in the protests and was arrested in the lobby of his apartment building in front of his pregnant wife, and then deported, sent to Louisiana, spent, 104 days in prison. A court forced the government to let him go. Now they're saying they're going to arrest him again.
Yeah, there was just I can't remember the headline, but I saw one a couple of days ago about him. I think he's out, but he's still giving interviews, and they're still trying to throw him out of the country.
Exactly. So, I mean, that would be an example of someone that the government would be saying doesn't have the right to protest because he has a green card, but he's not a citizen.
Bruce, you, as I said, you're a professor at Columbia University, which seems to be has been ground zero when it comes to all these demonstrations after the last couple of years. You're the Old Dominion Foundation Professor in the Humanities, quite a title, although you said before we went live that it doesn't pay much.
It pays nothing. It pays nothing. Yeah.
Well, it's still a nice title. I'll have it if you can
I
give
have
it to me. I'll
benefits.
buy it off you, I'll buy it off you,
It
Bruce.
comes with health insurance. That's the important thing.
No, but it's very valuable. But in all seriousness, Columbia, of course, was the ground zero of these protests. There's clearly a polemical element here, to put it mildly, about your book, Who's Allowed to Protest. Is this a local Columbia issue, and one that's very much bound up with who can and can't protest when it comes to Gaza and Israel, which is a very, very polemical, sensitive issue, both in the pro-Israel and the pro-Palestinian lobby, but not really relevant for anyone outside?
Ooh, ouch. I wouldn't say not really relevant for anyone outside. I actually think, you may disagree with me about this, that the fact that the images of the violence in Gaza got to a whole generation of young people via uncurated social media. I know you're not a fan of social media, neither am I, but in this case, it didn't depend on people at CNN or on the New York Times to choose the images, the information that the kids got. I think it's turned into the moral criterion for a whole generation of young people. I think you see that in voting behavior. So that's just about.
Even now, I mean, it seems to be, it's not necessarily off the headlines or out the headlines, but it seems a much less central issue, especially post Minneapolis.
Well, I'm certainly very happy to have Minneapolis in the headlines. I have no objection to that whatsoever. And it's true that there haven't been demonstrations lately of anything like the kind that we had, a year and a half ago. Of course, spring is coming, and we'll see what the spring brings. But to answer,
I don't want to. I didn't mean to say that I didn't think it was an important issue, that whether or not you should or shouldn't be allowed to demonstrate on the Palestinian Gaza Israel issue. But what I meant was that outside this, Bruce, this argument you make in Who's Allowed to Protest, suggesting that some conservatives, I know David Brooks is one you're critical of. He wrote a big piece on America needing a mass movement, although I guess it's not supposed to be an anti-Israel mass movement. And then another academic who wrote a book called We Have Never Been Woke, The Cultural Contradictions of a New Elite, Musa al-Gharbi. These are the people you're opposing.
Right.
Is there a broader argument outside the issue of Israel, Palestine, and Gaza?
I'm glad you asked that, because it's very important for me to say that, yes, there is absolutely a broader argument. One of the many places you could find the broader argument is in relation to Greta Thunberg, the young Swedish woman, because her campaign for climate justice, to do something about climate change, has been accused of exactly the same things. These are the spoiled rich kids of Europe. We don't have to listen to them. They're not ordinary people like us. They should just, shut up and enjoy their horse riding or whatever. That drives me completely crazy. I mean, it is sociologically not the case that it's only rich kids who do things like this. There are a lot of kids who are not rich at all who are protesting. I mean, climate change is an issue for everybody. It's a self-interested issue. I mean, if you care about the world you live in, then you care about that. But the same argument is applied to them, maybe because it doesn't seem self-interested in the way that demonstrating, let's say, for higher wages seems self-interested. And there's something about the apparent disinterestedness of certain kinds of protest that drives mainstream commentators crazy.
Can one also argue that there's a kind of protest that drives progressives like yourself crazy? I mean, people protesting against immigrants, people protesting against diversity. In your book, in this new book, which is very polemical, Who's Allowed to Protest, it's out next week, Bruce, do you touch on Charlottesville, the right of people to demonstrate, waving Nazi flags and suggesting that immigrants shouldn't be allowed into the United States, or for that matter, many demonstrations in Europe doing the same sort of thing?
Yeah. I think I have to confess that I don't talk about any of those examples, but I think you and I would agree that everybody really does have a right to protest. And people who are protesting immigrants, I don't agree with them, but of course I believe they have the right to protest. I can't imagine a democracy in which it wouldn't go both ways.
So is there you're a literary professor, so you deal with words like trope. Is there an equivalent trope on the right in terms of who's allowed to protest? Or shall we say from the left? Do leftists have the same, or some leftists at least have the same authoritarian impulse when it comes to protesting? Because I think what you're saying are guys like Brooks and al-Gharbi are really suggesting that certain people don't have the right to protest.
All I can think of, and I don't think it's what you're thinking of, is people who would draw a line. Certainly they would draw a line in Europe, less so here, about like Nazis. How do we feel, in other words, about Nazis protesting kind of as Nazis and saying things like the people in Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us, and so on and so forth, or using Nazi insignias. I suppose, I'm not a total free speech absolutist, and maybe you are, and maybe I should be.
Yeah, well, Greg Lukianov comes on the show a lot, and he, of course, is, and Fire is very much in that camp. I tend to be more sympathetic to that, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. My version of being Jewish is the Nazis maybe are really on the other side of this, just having had a history of putting their words into action in a way that, for better or worse, the left has not really done. I don't know. But I don't think at this moment in time there are arguments on the left about anybody on the right not having the right to raise their voices. I haven't heard any such thing.
So the guys like Brooks, I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of David Brooks. I think he's not just a windbag, but a very hypocritical one. And al-Gharbi, are they suggesting that these kids don't have the right to protest, or that we just shouldn't take them very seriously? They're just spoiled kids and we should just turn the other way when they go out on the street?
Yeah, it's the latter. This is not a question of rights. In that sense, my title is a bit misleading. It's really like, you need not pay attention to these people. It's better not to pay attention to them. Yeah, that was enough to push my buttons. But it's not a question of legal rights. They're not talking about that.
Although I don't suppose David Brooks has written much that you would necessarily agree with. Is there an equivalent to the counterculture of the 60s? You mentioned that you think Gaza is the moral issue of our age. Back in the 60s, of course, many people said the same about Vietnam. Is there an equivalent? Is history, in a sense, repeating itself? Did conservatives make the same argument about the privileged hippies who demonstrated against the Vietnam War?
Well, it's funny you mention that, because yes, they did. There was probably a little bit more psychologizing, I think, in the 60s than sociologizing. What I see more these days is sociologizing. And I do a certain amount of polemic against the use or misuse of sociology these days. But the way of arguing in the 60s, there was a certain amount of, these kids are privileged, they're not getting drafted, it's working class kids who are getting drafted, which was true. But more of it, they're just rebelling against their parents. So all of this is just Oedipal nonsense that need not be taken seriously, because it's all psychological. Maybe that, it was an earlier moment and psychology seemed more important. than now. But the same, it was the same kind of argument. You don't have to. It's not that they don't have the right to speak, but you don't have to take them seriously because they're just acting out some kind of family drama. They're angry at their parents. They were raised too comfortably. They're trying to.
They want to sleep with their mothers. Yeah, that's always the problem.
Oh, goodness gracious! I don't think it got quite that bad, but it could have. It could have.
Bruce, I was up at Columbia a couple of weeks ago. Lovely up there, and I was also there last year or a year or two ago during all the demonstrations. Why did Columbia, as I said, you're a professor there, and you're very much bound up in the right for protest and in the culture and politics of protest, and particularly when it comes to Gaza. Why did Columbia become ground zero in all this?
Good question. Some of it, I think, has to do with the history, the fact that Columbia 1968 caught the world's attention in a big way. I mean, that happened in April 1968, before May 1968 in Paris. Apparently, the kids in Paris asked the kids at Columbia, okay, we've occupied a building now, what do we do? So Columbia was really a flashpoint even back then. It's also true that Edward W. Said was who died in 2003.
Whose chair you now occupy. Your position used to be that the chair of the Old Dominion Foundation professor was Said. Now it's Bruce Robbins. Quite a big chair, Bruce, for you to occupy.
Don't humiliate me in public like this. I have no pretension to fill those shoes. But he was a very, very visible Palestinian presence. I think he expanded radically the range of things that were sayable in American mainstream discourse, just by taking up the Palestinian cause, by complaining, which he did, that there was no place for Palestinians to tell their own story in the American media. And that attracted a lot of attention to Columbia. I mean, his office was trashed on more than one occasion. There were death threats against him. He was a very, very visible presence. Just to follow this story out a little bit, the head of CBS News, whom you may have run into, a name that has been on the lips of many, when she was an undergraduate at Columbia.
You can mention her. You're allowed to mention her name, Bruce, on this show.
I prefer not to, but in any case.
Well, you might, because not everyone will know who you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I mean, in a way, you're confirming their critique of your side by your unwillingness to even mention your name. I mean, she's not exactly Adolf Eichmann, is she?
No, she's not. But
well, let's mention her name, Bruce. Come on.
Right, gone out of my head. There's probably some deep psychological reason for this.
I may have to mention her myself.
Mention it, please. Mention it.
I actually can't remember now.
Yeah, well, it will come up. I am getting perverse pleasure out of my inability to remember right now. She tried to get Palestinian professors fired when she was an undergraduate. She was sponsored by something called the David Project, which had put a lot of money into propaganda, basically, that these people, anybody who was arguing for justice for Palestinians, was basically a terrorist. And that also, I mean, for a while, called a lot of attention to Columbia in terms of the Israel-Palestine conflict.
I remember her name now. I looked it up. Bari Weiss. It's a B-A-R-I. It's a woman, not a man, because males, when they call Bari, I think have two R's and a Y.
That's very, very true.
But in all seriousness, Bruce, again, this comes back to my earlier critique. Is this an inside, I don't know, in Washington, they talk about inside the Beltway. I don't know what you would talk about an inside Columbia University or inside Upper West Side New York kind of argument, where there are liberal Jews on the one hand arguing for the right to protest and the credibility of protest, and then the Bari Weisses of the world who argue that anyone who criticizes Israel is anti-Semitic. I mean, this stuff's a bit boring, isn't it?
Well, it hasn't been boring for me because I was brought up on charges. And the idea of me as a Jew being anti-Semitic is so crazy that I look around, you know, what funhouse am I teaching in? But not only was I brought up on charges, I was found guilty.
Who by? Bari Weiss?
By Columbia University.
Oh, so you got into trouble with did they take your chair away from you?
They did not take my chair away. I would have felt much more important if they had taken my chair away. And I would have been interviewed by even more people than I'm being interviewed by, as it is. But no, they
you wouldn't have to slum it on this show. You'd get on CBS News.
I was on CNN at a certain point, actually.
Oh, you were?
Yeah. Debating Brett Stevens, which was a moment.
Brett's been on this show, and actually, not everyone likes Brett. I actually rather enjoyed having him on the show. He's very nice, but some people don't want to have anything to do with him.
Well, all right, I'm not going to give you my opinion. Let's just say we didn't agree about anything.
At least remember his name, in contrast with Bari Weiss.
I'm sorry that I actually do remember Bari Weiss's name extremely well. Anyway, but okay. I'll tell the story. It might be more interesting than my book, frankly, although it's in the book. I was teaching a course on representations of atrocity.
Yeah, you got a book about your last year. You had a book out called "Atrocity: A Literary History." So this is one of your specializations, atrocity.
It is indeed, you know, and I was writing a book about it, and I taught a course about it. Months before the encampments at Columbia, I had distributed a syllabus in which I said the last week will be devoted to Gaza. And I didn't say anything about, you know, what Gaza, whether it would be October 7th, 2023, and what Hamas had done, or what the Israeli military had been doing afterwards. I just said Gaza. And I asked the students to recommend whatever readings they wanted, that they thought that their classmates would benefit from. And then, lo and behold, April 22nd came, and there was an encampment protesting atrocity in Gaza. So I said to the class, I think this is an opportunity. I would like to walk over there and have some conversation amongst ourselves and with the demonstrators. I understand not everybody will feel comfortable doing this. Anyone who doesn't feel comfortable, please don't come. No consequences, of course. But anybody who wants to take advantage of the opportunity, let's go. So about half the class went, and two of the people who did not go brought charges against me because I had violated their equal opportunity for an education by making them miss one class. And I thought of this as a frivolous charge. I mentioned when I was brought up on charges and I got my lawyer and I had my hearing, I said, do you recognize the category of the frivolous charge? A charge which, even if true, would not be worth pursuing. They didn't say anything. There was another hearing and they found me guilty. So, you know, there is a personal side to this.
Did you go to jail?
Yeah, in fact, that's where I am now. I mean, it looks like my office, but really it's jail.
It's a nice jail with lots of books. I mean, in all seriousness, Bruce, you talked about the 70s, the 60s, and the sort of family interpretation. Isn't this a bit of a family row amongst liberals and conservatives, especially Jews in New York, about what you can and can't say and do over Israel? And that most people just, you know, we've already spent most of the interview talking about this. Meanwhile, something real is happening in Iran. I don't see massive demonstrations or counter demonstrations. I'm not sure what you or Bari Weiss would say about this. Isn't that the story and not this endless arguing over Gaza, Israel?
I certainly take Iran very, very seriously. There's a big difference between what's happening there and what's happening, you know, in Israel, Gaza, Palestine. It's the involvement of the U.S. I mean, the U.S. has some involvement because our sanctions have helped, I think, create the situations of deprivation in Iran, which have helped further the demonstrations. So there is some U.S. responsibility. But I think, frankly, the regime in Iran bears the brunt of the responsibility, and not the US. I personally am much more liable to demonstrate when, either as a Jew or as an American, I feel responsible. And I think that's true for a lot of people. So this is not about the right to protest. It's just what gets me off the sofa, away from Netflix and out in the street. Not many things do, but what does more than anything else is the feeling that I'm responsible, that I belong to groups that are responsible. And that's particularly my fellow Jews and my fellow Americans.
So you're saying that in terms of the kind of kids who were protesting or were protesting over Gaza, the people who had the tent cities at Columbia and other universities, is that they were thinking and doing the same thing. I mean, I had a daughter, or I have a daughter who was a bit of a demonstrator. I'm not sure how much she really knew about the complexity of the situation. I mean, she certainly was involved in all sorts of tent cities.
Yeah, well, my impression is that, I mean, I didn't know most of the kids. I knew a couple because they were students of mine. They seemed to be very, very well informed. And they helped us all. Sorry, if this seems too Upper West Side for you, what can I say? One of the members of the board of trustees of Columbia was on the board of trustees of Lockheed Martin, which is a company that provides a lot of the military hardware that Israel used in Gaza. And people were saying, it counts when Columbia either objects or doesn't object to the way its endowment is used and who's on its board of trustees. That may be too, local, but I understand that people felt very strongly about it. They've also felt very strongly about the lack of support on the part of the Columbia administration for Columbia students who were arrested and threatened with deportation. It wouldn't have been very hard for them to say, we really don't want ICE arresting our students and jailing them, and we don't want the administration deporting them. We support our students. So, very, very local, but it helps explain why students at Columbia got as worked up about it as they did.
How deep are the wounds on all this stuff? I mean, maybe I'm being unfair, making a little bit light of the whole thing. I'm not at Columbia and teach there. I have been on the streets. But have people forgotten now? I mean, we've had, as I said, we've had Minnesota. We've had lots of other things, possible, conceivable, at least according to the news today, that Donald Trump might be planning another military strike against Iran. One wonders whether people would demonstrate for or against that, and if indeed the Ayatollah's regime was overthrown, how the left and indeed the right on the campus would respond. But are these things done now? Are they fixed, or is the wound so deep that it will last forever?
Nothing lasts forever. And, I'm certainly not going to predict that this will. I really can't say. I mean, the Columbia campus seems pretty quiet right now, and maybe it's going to stay quiet. I couldn't tell you. I don't think this is the one big issue in the world. I mean, I totally take the point that what's going on in Iran is bigger. What's going on in Sudan is bigger. The new American policy toward Latin America, where, gunboat diplomacy is back. I think we, whatever that we is, are paying as much attention to those things as we are to the Israel-Palestine thing. And I think, we're right to. If you don't mind, I'm going to try to divert the conversation a little bit in the direction of California.
Okay.
I think one thing that you and I have in common, and which is a theme of my book, is respect for expertise, respect for knowledge, which is to say, what's on the other side of the administration's attack on higher education. So when I think of California these days, well, I think of LA, I think of the fires and the phrase, an elite team of firefighters. There were people who were absolutely very, very well trained. in firefighting, and who sacrificed a great deal to try to fight the fires in Southern California. When I object to anti-elitism, I'm trying to make a broader case. This is now way beyond Gaza, Palestine, Israel, against the kind of anti-elitism that encourages closing down federal agencies and that discourages respect for expertise as a legitimate thing that our society needs. So from the little bit I know about you, it seems to me that you and I are on the same page about that. And that's the larger argument of a great deal of this book, that we shouldn't let our egalitarianism get out of hand to the point where we say, you know, that our problem is elites in every sense, or our problem is educated elites rather than moneyed elites. So people who actually know how to do things. Does this make sense?
Yeah, know how to demonstrate. Now, I take your point, and I appreciate your willingness to broaden the conversation. But I wonder, Bruce, and again, I'm thinking out loud here. I mean, I take your point, and I think I'm not a great lover of Bari Weiss, but I mean, I take her point in some ways. Do you think that protesters should, when they go out on the streets to deal with an issue, shall we say, as complicated, as morally complicated as Israel-Palestine, the kind of kids from Columbia or elsewhere who go out on the streets to demonstrate, to occupy their campuses, to do whatever they're doing to raise the issue, do you think they need to be better armed, more informed, be able to say, look, I know that Gaza, maybe when it comes to quantifying death or suffering, you've written on atrocity, so you're all too familiar with this, that maybe it doesn't compare with what's happening in Sudan or Eritrea or the Democratic Republic of Congo or wherever. But nonetheless, I still have the right to demonstrate, and I still feel this very strongly because, as you say, as an American, it's particularly sensitive and resonant.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to what I said before, that I think the demonstrators at Columbia, from what I know of them, were feeling some version of what I feel myself, which is I'm much more likely to protest when I feel responsible. And there are a lot of places where terrible things are happening in the world, but the US is not responsible and we Jews are not responsible. I mean, it's terrible and it's worth, saying something about, but the intensity of the feeling is not going to be the same as when the group to which I belong is doing it, and it's being done in my name.
So I'm not sure it's being done entirely in your name. So you're saying as a Jew, you have a particular sensitivity to the right to protest. So you're saying that it would be different for someone who isn't Jewish?
Well, I hope people who are not Jewish to certainly, okay, I feel like when I protest as a Jew, which I don't necessarily announce, but
well, you've announced it on this show.
I'm announcing it now, and I'm certainly, I have no objection to announcing it. I am also encouraging people who might worry that they would be thought of as anti-Semitic if they did protest. I'm saying, please go ahead. It's fine. We Jews are really okay with this. In fact, we're all on the same side here. I mean, I think this is something that, if what you would call liberal Jews need to do for the Goyim, for the people who are not Jewish.
Oh, who are the Goyim, Bruce?
If you don't know, I can't tell you.
They're not very wise. Finally, in all seriousness, you've been a good sport to deal with my obnoxious questions. In 20, 30, 50 years, whenever this thing gets resolved, 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, do you think people will look back and think, perhaps in the same way some people look back at Nazi Germany, totalitarian Russia even, and say, why weren't people protesting? This clearly was, I don't know what the numbers are now in Gaza, 70, 80,000 people killed in the latest round, the latest war. Why weren't people protesting? So it's rather than who's allowed to protest, people will write books about this in 5, 10, 15, 20 years saying, why didn't people protest?
Yeah. Maybe you're even more optimistic about history than I am. And I think of myself as a little bit naive when I imagine historical progress. This would be historical progress. What I would predict, however, which is not a happy prediction, is that the many people who died in Gaza since October 2023, they have generated, whatever happens to Hamas, and it can go, it can stay, whatever happens, the Israelis have generated a whole generation of people who are going to be at least as angry at them as Hamas was or is. So, if they're being smart, unless they, Netanyahu's policy is known, he has encouraged Hamas because it's good for him politically. But there's going to be violence just because of all the people who lost family members or had family.
Yeah, no, I take that point, but you're not answering my question, or maybe I didn't make it clear enough. I think you're implying, given that you suggest that Gaza, Israel, is the moral issue of our age in the same way perhaps Vietnam was in the 60s. You're suggesting that anyone who doesn't protest this American investment, arming of Israel, and the brutality of the Israeli military response to the Hamas invasion, anyone who doesn't protest are morally compromised. Is that what you're saying?
It's
Jew
not.
or otherwise. You don't have to be Jewish to protest.
No, of course. I'm not saying that. And one of the reasons I don't say that is that I'm a very reluctant protester myself. I really don't like doing it. It takes a lot to get me out of my house.
Off the couch, off the Netflix, Bruce.
I'm very comfortable where I am. I watch sports. I don't know. There are a lot of things I prefer to be doing than be out protesting, catching cold. I have one now. So I'm not in a position to point the finger at other people who don't. I mean, obviously, I think it's good if we all manage to, but I'm not pointing the finger. I understand that life is complicated and there are many demands on us. Children must be fed, dinner must be cooked, the trash has to be taken down.
Netflix has to be watched. So I guess what I'm suggesting is, if I was writing the book, which of course I'm not, and I haven't, and I won't, I would entitle it "Who's Not Allowed to Protest."
That might have been a better title for it.
Well, Bruce Robbins, you've been a wonderful sport. You've dealt with, as I said, my particularly obnoxious questions, and you've been very honest and forthright in your position. I actually don't disagree with you. Thank you so much. And we'll have to get you back on to talk more atrocity. It's always a cheerful subject to discuss.
Happy to come back, but I was happy. I didn't find the questions obnoxious, okay? Just good questions.
Hi, this is Andrew again. Thank you so much for listening or watching the show. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. We're on Substack, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all the platforms. And I'd be very curious as to your comments as well on what you think of the show, how it can be improved, and the kinds of guests that you would enjoy hearing or listening to in future. Thank you again.